Public Affairs very much thanks Residco, our sole corporate underwriter, for helping to make the production of this show possible.
The wrap on this is you are an expert. You're not convinced that there weren't election irregularities.
I know there were.
Okay. And now you work diligently with the Illinois Conservative Union, and you have found reason to believe there could be 800,000 or more on the Illinois registered votes to vote.
Yeah, which
shouldn't be, but you
which provides the opportunity for fraud.
Now you have, because what happens if they're on the rolls? How does that provide the opportunity for fraud? Well, if they shouldn't be on the rolls.
If they shouldn't be on the rolls, the opportunity for fraud comes about by the fact that, of course, their voting history is public, right? The fact that they haven't voted in X period of time, then people who are not necessarily our best interests at heart go and get ballots for the people that haven't voted, that don't belong on the roll. One thing that we could tell, even though they kept us in this corral and far away from actual observation, we could tell that the ballots that came in there, these were mail-in ballots that they were processing. There's about 300,000 of them came in there, and they were opened when they show up in the room.
You're not supposed to be.
We have no idea when or where.
When they're open, there should be a Republican and a Democrat.
Should be a Republican, should be a Democrat. Somebody should have already verified the signatures.
Didn't happen.
We
don't really know what happened. Where they came from, we don't know.
We don't know.
Where was that?
That's Allegheny County. That's Pittsburgh.
Could that have been an election irregularity?
I would suspect that it was.
Because
it was criminal.
Whether
but
it's
they
Chicago, whether in this coming election of 2024, where we have battleground states, we're talking same old similar battlegrounds, right?
Right.
We're talking Wisconsin. We're talking North Carolina. We're talking Pennsylvania. We're talking Georgia.
Yes.
These folks all have similar problems, whether it's Atlanta in Georgia, whether it's various cities, Milwaukee and otherwise in Wisconsin. It's not new. We know the source of these problems.
Yeah.
We know how important it is. And you know, because you are an election expert. You are a Constitution expert, right? You are the guy who's written David Shestokas' Constitutional Soundbites, right? This is you.
That's my book, yes.
You are an expert on the U.S. Constitution, putting it modest. But in your view, was it a mistake?
I was hoping for something like Los Angeles.
But is there ability to get this job done without that?
The job of cleaning up the whole 800,000?
Yes.
It's going to be very, very difficult.
David Shestokas, when we had an election day, not an election season, there would be precinct captains from both parties who would be there looking over the shoulder of people who were deciding, hey, should this person vote? Are they registered to vote? Are they eligible? There were people checking, right? That's what you want.
Absolutely. There should be citizens involved in overseeing elections more than the government. We cannot just leave it to the government day in and day out. We got too complacent. We allowed that too much to happen, and we allowed for the people with jurisdictions to happen. And now they come and say, these days, they come and say, okay, we've counted, you sit down and shut up.
Right.
And this is where the problem is. This is why people are not confident in the outcome so often.
So we need a resurgence of that involvement by the citizenry, right?
Absolutely.
It's an obligation of every citizen, Democrat or Republican, to make sure everybody who's legally entitled to vote can vote, but nobody who's not legally entitled to vote is voting. Both things, right?
Absolutely. Here's the problem. Everybody runs around yelling about rights. Hardly anybody goes around talking about responsibilities. There's a situation when if you're a citizen, if you have rights, along with your rights come responsibilities to make a contribution in terms of seeing to it that your elections are fair and square.
People have heard, I think, heard something about a lawsuit against the Illinois State Board of Elections by the Illinois Conservative Union. We'll come back in a second because you know something about that. You were involved. And if people Google something that I've just said there, they'll find this lawsuit said, or out of that lawsuit came the wording that there are 8 million registered voters in Illinois. 8 million registered voters, And some people say, as a result of that lawsuit, investigation, et cetera, that it appears there are 800,000 or so inactive voters. And what they want to know, David Shestokas, is that true? Hold on. Are there 800,000 inactive voters, and are they people who are on the rolls even though they're dead, even though they've moved away, even though they haven't voted for 2 successive presidential elections? What do you know about those 800,000 people, or is the number even larger?
The number's potentially larger, Jeff. The fact is we don't know what the number is, and that was one of the reasons for the lawsuit to begin with. I filed the lawsuit on behalf of the Illinois Conservative Union, which, by the way, this is when we talk about citizen involvement. The Illinois, because it has a really kind of high-sounding name, but the chairman of the Illinois Conservative Union is a woman by the name of Carol Davis, and she kind of fashions herself as a granny with a mission. And the Illinois Conservative Union, the basic board of directors, is like 4 ladies, senior citizens that are involved and want to do good for the country. And so this is the kind of thing that we need more involvement of. And those are the folks that were the movers and shakers behind this. They took me to lunch in the spring of 2019 and said that they wanted to do something to try and clean up the voter rolls, and would I help them?
Who's they?
Loretta Save, Nancy Hayes, Carol Davis, and one other gal. But they took me to lunch at the Cheesecake Factory in Oak Brook and said, Dave, we want to do something. Can you help us? And that was the genesis of the lawsuit.
So these are the movers and shakers of what is known as the Illinois Conservative Union. That is a nonpartisan group.
Yes.
that is not for profit, and they sued eventually. You sued the Illinois State Board of Elections.
Yes.
Was that 3 years ago?
Yes, we started in 2019 the investigation and doing what was necessary to set the table to file a lawsuit. And the only reason we wound up filing a lawsuit was because, of course, in our view, the Illinois State Board of Elections was not complying with the law.
What weren't they doing that they should have been doing? What's their role, and what were they not doing that they should have been doing?
There's something called the National Voter Registration Act.
Right.
And within the National Voter Registration Act, there's some duties of the Board of Elections, of the people that are in charge of jurisdiction, in charge of keeping voter rolls, to keep the voter rolls clean. And the National Voter Registration Act also allows, there's a paragraph in there that allows citizens to check up on if the jurisdictions are following the act. They create essentially what they call a private attorney general. They allow citizens to enforce the act. And so Nancy and Loretta and Carol went down and asked to see the voter rolls. And the Board of Elections essentially, in the long run, said no. Then we wrote them a letter saying that they were not in compliance with the National Voter Registration Act. They said, okay, well, you can come down and we'll give you a computer terminal and you'll be able to look at one voter at a time. You know?
It's like one day at a time, one voter at a time. How many voters are there in Illinois? Well, we said 8 million.
8 million
registered voters.
Yeah.
Possibly 8 million voters. You're supposed to deal with this one at a time?
Right.
The political units, according to this law, according to the Illinois State Board of Elections, they could get they could get it on a computer, they could do searches, they would give them whatever they wanted if they were a political unit. And they said, didn't they, that Illinois state law said that we can't give it under this law to non-political units. Illinois Conservative Union is not a political unit, can't give it to you. The Attorney General, right?
Somewhere along the line, they actually, Kwame Raoul.
Did he get involved? Did he say, no, yeah, I'm the counsel to these folks, and we're not going to give it to you. We can't. We shouldn't. Did I get that right?
You got that right. They said.
So was he doing justice then?
Absolutely not.
You sure? Because he said that's the law. That's the law, David.
He said that's the law of the state of Illinois. The law of the state of Illinois has restrictions on who can get voter data.
And we don't follow the state of Illinois law? Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is they didn't follow federal law.
Oh, so federal preempts state law.
Federal preempts state law.
Hey, Kwame went to law school. He didn't know that?
You're going to have to ask Kwame.
Kwame, we've invited John. Come on. You'll get your fair statement. We'll get your fair time. You just explain it. Just tell David Shestokas he's wrong. Illinois supersedes. Illinois overrides federal law, huh? Illinois preempts federal law.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
No, it's the National Voter Registration.
Are there any cases right on point that say federal law preempts state law?
There's cases out of Kentucky, Virginia, and California that already said that the federal law of the National Voter Registration Act preempts state restrictions.
So that was the law.
It was already the law.
It was unquestioned.
It was already the law of the country.
And
of the
in fact,
United
that
States.
was the compromise. Back in 1993, Clinton was behind this, and he said, look, motor voter, will expand the franchise, right?
Right.
And the Republicans said, okay, you can expand the franchise, but we want the ability to make sure those rules stay clean, so will you do this? And he said, sure. So that was the compromise, right?
That was the
But
trade-off.
Kwame doesn't know about that compromise. He doesn't care about the compromise. What's the point?
You're going to have
Because
to.
Kwame was the problem that kept this lawsuit going
Absolutely.
for 3 years, right?
Absolutely.
Because you would have been happy if they said, here's the data, we'll take the data and we'll go home, right?
We'll take the. We wrote them several letters in compliance with our obligations under the NVRA to ultimately put us in a position to file a lawsuit.
So you did the briefs for the Judicial Watch.
I filed
Primarily.
I filed the original
Filed the
lawsuit.
lawsuit,
Did an
filed the
original
complaint.
background, put together the exhibits, built the case.
Built the case. And then Judicial Watch was involved as a plaintiff as well, as they are
They became additional counsel.
additional counsel.
They became additional counsel after we already had the case
You
underway.
were the dynamo who was pushing this.
Oh no, I filed the subpoenas. I filed the lawsuit. I filed.
Okay.
I gave
So
notice
3
to
years
the
later,
State
let's
Board of
scroll
Elections.
forward.
After 3 years of litigation, they ultimately said okay, and ultimately said we'll give you the stuff that
The
we
Illinois
should have.
State Board of Elections
Illinois-
said okay. Kwame Raoul, the Attorney General, said okay.
Yeah,
We'll just,
we'll do what we should have done the
Sorry.
day that the girls
Did he ever
knocked on
say?
the door.
We're scroll forward 2 months ahead. We're taping this September 20, almost 2 months to the day. Do you have the data? Do you have the stuff you need? Are we going to be at nirvana in Illinois for having fair, honest elections?
I don't have the answer. The
What's-
data is now being available. The data is now
Do you have
available
it?
through
I don't
the.
available. Do you have it? Because they're supposed to give it, as I understand the law, within 10 days of your asking, right?
Yeah, I spoke
When
with.
did you ask for it, and did you get it?
I spoke with one of the members of the board yesterday, and they have it.
But you don't have it yet.
I have not seen, but I don't have to monitor this. I've got other
So
things
you
going
think
on.
you think perhaps
They're
things-
working with it. They've
Who
got
are
the
they
data.
working with to give the data to? Who's handling it?
Primarily Jan Shaw is one of the board members of the
Illinois Conservative.
Illinois
So
Conservative.
they're going to ride herd on this. They're going to enforce this. They're the people
When they have,
responsible.
if they wind
Is that
up
right?
with a problem, then they'll call us and we'll have
So
to go
as
back
far
to
as
the
you
judge.
know, they're getting the data and they're going
Yeah.
to start looking at it. Any report to you as to initial views, whether as to are there 800,000 people on the rolls in Illinois?
You know,
who shouldn't
Jeff,
be?
at this juncture, what needs to be done is to take the data and then you wind up cross-referencing the data with things like the United States Postal Service and the Social Security Death Database. And once you have the data, then you can start cross-referencing it with other kinds of information to determine whether or not the data is accurate.
So they have to do some work. Are they?
Yeah, they're
do
on.
they
That
have
work is
experts?
underway.
Do they have people who can
That
handle
work is
this?
underway.
Because so if we look at the agreement, the data is they're going to get the names of everybody on the roll, right?
Right.
And they're going to get the address, residential address. They're going to get their telephone numbers, mailing address, email address, the registrant status, whether they're active or inactive.
Yeah, there's an active or inactive. There's actually a legal definition within the NVRA, within the National Voter Registration Act, of active versus inactive, and then the election jurisdiction is supposed to, when they've missed two full federal elections,
Consecutive presidential
two
elections.
presidential
If
elections,
they didn't vote in 2 consecutive presidential elections,
and did not vote otherwise in the meantime, then the
what happens?
election jurisdiction is supposed to reach out via postcard and other means to determine whether or not that individual is still either active or alive or whatever.
so a postcard goes out, and that individual, if that individual is here, it goes to his or her address here
Right.
in Illinois. If they've moved and somehow they get it, even though if they move.
It's not supposed to be forwarded.
It's not supposed to be forwarded. So then they assume if they don't get it back, that person's no longer there. Or do they assume the person's died?
If it's returned, then if it's returned to sender, then there should be,
for whatever
they should be removed.
Okay. So, and that postcard, the trigger for that postcard is supposed to be that the Illinois State Board of Elections does that on seeing on their own examination that this person has not voted for 2 consecutive presidential elections. Do I have that right?
That's right. Well, it's not just the Board of Elections. There's also the other jurisdictions, the Cook County Board of Elections.
They're supposed to be looking at this too.
They're supposed to be reviewing that as well.
But
because in Illinois we have 108 jurisdictions.
So forget the postcard for a moment. Let's say you're supposed to get that information that they get a postcard and was a tell. That's one bit of data. But if you look at this data and you find out 2 consecutive elections they haven't voted in between, then you or the people looking at it for ICU, the Illinois Conservative Union, those folks can go to the Board of Elections and say, let's get them removed.
Exactly.
Can they do that?
They can do that. But at the moment...
Or if they have reason to believe that person is dead, they can get them removed. Or if they have reason to believe the person has moved out of the state of Illinois.
Yeah.
All of those things. That's a lot of work.
It's a tremendous amount of work, and it's something that the election jurisdictions should be doing on their own.
I know they should be, but does the Illinois Conservative Union have the staff, the muscle to get this done, or do they need more?
Oh, they certainly need more. But
who's going to help them?
But they're not the only people around.
Yeah,
we've got other organizations that are also involved in election integrity issues around the state. The Illinois Freedom Alliance out in Rock Island. There's some great folks that are involved in trying to do this.
So there should be a coalition of people, almost county by county.
Oh, absolutely.
Does this stuff get removed by going to the county clerk?
Yes.
Or does it get removed by dealing with the Illinois State Board?
No, the State Board of Elections is more of an aggregator.
They're responsible by law essentially for keeping clean rolls.
Right.
But they have to do it in conjunction with the county, which the counties are the ultimate election determiners of who votes and who doesn't, or who can vote, who can't. Is
That's
that
correct.
How it works?
That's
in
correct.
In Illinois, but around
they're the
country.
registrars. They're the keeper of the records.
Right. Okay. So that's where we are. I mean, there was a settlement agreement. Were you involved in the settlement agreement?
Not really. In the end, the Judicial Watch folks and the other people were handled most of it in the end. And the settlement agreement really ultimately was a situation where the Attorney General indicated that they're going to do what they should have done in the first place. But then it also indicated that there was certain confidentiality obligations on behalf of the people that are getting the data, that they don't use the data for business reasons, for marketing purposes, that they just use.
Okay. Those are all niceties, but at the end of the day, the settlement agreement, I believe, says if there's a material breach of this agreement, if you ask for the data and you don't get it as you should, upon such material breach, my understanding is the agreement says this agreement may be enforced in an action for relief, including damages for breach of contract.
Yes.
This is like a contract. Injunctive relief or other equitable relief with the court. It says with the court retaining jurisdiction to enforce this agreement.
Yes.
Does that mean that Judge Sarah Ellis, who presided over this matter in the settlement agreement, is she the judge who retains jurisdiction?
Well, she's a magistrate judge that we agreed to.
She's a magistrate judge. She's
agreed,
not a federal judge? I thought she was a federal.
We agreed to the magistrate judge.
Sarah Ellis.
Yes.
Who's the federal judge who's over her?
It's a good question. I don't know.
Well, who is, when it says the court retained jurisdiction?
Well, the court,
does that mean?
It's the Northern District of Illinois.
Okay.
You know, so whoever we wind up getting, that's not personal to a personal judge.
Okay, but what I mean is...
But right at the moment, Ms. Ellis, or Judge Ellis is where you would go in the first place. But just if Judge Ellis was no longer available, there'll be somebody in her stead.
But some people say, when I talk to them, that when you settle this kind of matter, you should make sure that the judge who's been involved, whether it's the magistrate or the judge essentially over that magistrate, that they stay involved. Kind of like when you have a consent decree where we know the city of Chicago was sued, essentially, I think, by the Department of Justice, and they had a consent decree, and there was a monitor, and there was constant supervision to make sure that in a sense that court originally retained jurisdiction. Did that happen here?
There is not the equivalent of a consent decree, but it's not unusual that, like I had hoped when I filed it that we would wind up with a situation where, like they had in Los Angeles. Los Angeles County was a situation where there was ongoing regular reports on the updating of removal of 1.5 million voters from the voter rolls in Los Angeles
Who
County.
made those ongoing?
That Judicial Watch was part and parcel of that.
They were getting it, but somebody was making reports. The equivalent of the
Well, the
Illinois
county,
State-
the county,
county was making those reports to Judicial Watch,
well, to the court,
to the court,
yeah,
and to Judicial
so
Watch. We get
there
that,
was
right?
active monitoring by the court over there.
That was
in
that settlement agreement.
Yeah.
But that didn't happen here.
That was not how
Mistake?
it turned out.
I don't want to be a Monday morning quarterback.
And neither do I.
want to know. But
I
was
filed
it-
the suit, but I
But
did not
in your
finish it.
view, was it a mistake?
I was hoping for something like Los Angeles.
But is there ability to get this job done without that?
The job of cleaning up the whole 800,000,
Yes.
it's going to be very, very difficult because there's the resources like you talked about are just
So
need to
what's
be
the
used.
solution? What do the citizens do? What does the Illinois Conservative Union do? What do the other groups that are involved? What do they do, David Shestokas? Not to put pressure on you, but if you don't have an answer for us, we have to go to the next person.
We may have to go to the next person in terms of what do they have to. Right now,
Right.
they're in the first stages of taking the data that's been provided for them and doing the kind of data comparison work that I talked about. And so that's the kind of work that you have to do in the first place before you can actually go back to the county clerk and say, listen, these are the people we believe don't belong there.
Well, how long will that take to do that? Give me a ballpark estimate.
I'm
Inquiring minds
not
wanna
a
know.
computer guy, Jeff. That I'm not monitoring that.
So you really have no idea. It
I
could
don't-
take 3 months. It could take a year.
I don't have
Who
any
would
idea.
know that? Anybody who I can go to?
I was talking to Jan last night. I can call, but
She's at the Illinois Conservative
Yeah,
Union.
yeah.
What's her position there?
she's one of the board members. I'm telling you, it's a group of citizens. You know,
Right.
it's not any kind of big organization. Nobody's got big funding. These are people that want to do the right thing, and the best thing anybody could do is to call them and say, "Can I help you?" You know.
So people watching this want to help. They should get in touch with the Illinois
They
Conservative.
could look up ICU. They could look up
Google
Illinois.
it, Harold Davis, any of these people.
Annie Partridge out in Rock Island. You can look up Bruce Johnson at We the People. There's organizations all around the state that are contributing to election integrity projects, and I believe many of them are also lending a hand to what's going forward with the data now that the data is available.
Well, what about the Illinois GOP? Are they involved?
Not to my knowledge.
Could they be?
They could be.
They're not barred from this.
No. Well, strangely
In fact,
enough.
the Democratic Party, if they wanted to be good citizens, could be involved.
Well,
doesn't
strangely
appear
enough,
that they are.
Strangely enough, both of those parties have access to the data.
That's right. They already have it
They already
already.
had it already.
They can't share it by law. With
they could have
the
done the
Illinois
work
Conservative.
themselves.
They could do it themselves. They just couldn't give it to the Illinois Conservative
Right.
Union. But just like the Illinois Conservative Union on getting this is barred by the settlement agreement from giving it to these
Right.
other groups. So in a sense, these other groups that you're mentioning can't quite do this because
Well,
they
if it's
can't
for
get
that purpose. No.
they can get this information, these other
For-
groups,
within
for the
that purpose,
purpose of
you can-
cleaning up the rules.
You can have folks that are involved in analyzing the
Okay,
data.
well, that's good. I didn't understand that from the settlement agreement. So
Yeah,
the
no,
Illinois
they're not limited to those 4 people.
So the Illinois GOP can get involved if they want in doing this.
They've always had the data.
Oh, excuse me. I keep saying that.
The GOP's had the data. Democrats have had the data.
So why?
There was nothing to stop any of the
So
parties. There was
why-
nothing to stop any of the parties
why
from
isn't
doing
the
this for the last
Illinois GOP
50 years.
I have to say, we'll have to get somebody to talk to you from the Illinois GOP, maybe Don Tracy, the chairman, because why aren't they doing this? Because they've had the data. They have the data.
They've always had access to it.
They believe in electric integrity.
I'd like to think so.
They would not want 8 million people on the rolls. Excuse me, 800,000 on the rolls
That don't
if they
belong there.
Don't belong there.
No.
So they should be jumping
Because
up
that-
and down. They've had the data, and for some reason they're not doing it. But now that we've called it to their attention, I'll probably be getting a call tomorrow from Don Tracy, or as soon as he sees us, says, "Hey Jeff, we're on it." Right?
That would be wonderful.
Okay.
That would be wonderful.
I just saw Don a week ago. If I had known this, if I'd realized, I did know it. I just didn't. I didn't register.
It's
But
sort of-
now,
it's sort
so
of
to
like-
speak, didn't register.
Sort
but
of
now I
like
have.
Dorothy always had the power.
Right. She just didn't quite realize, because we all know, folks. We all know when people say, "Where do you get the power?" When you have it, it comes from within. Okay. Same famous movies, famous milers, famous distance runners who have the power. Where does that power come to do that? These fantastic athletic acts, these fantastic Nobel Prize winning acts in science, in physics. Where do you get the power?
Yeah, no,
David, where do you get the power?
Like as you
Do
say,
you have the power?
internally, you have to go
Internally.
forward. You
Right.
know, you have to go forward. You have to step forward. And I will say, relative again to these the four women that stepped forward to do this, that's where they got the power to get us into a courtroom.
Carol Davis, as the chairman, be fair, we got to challenge everybody, and we shouldn't just restrict it to the Republican Party, but also the Democratic Party, because they've had access. And if they really believe, as they say, Democratic Party, in election integrity, why aren't they trying to deal with this? They want to say, hey, Jeff, you're wrong. There aren't 800,000 people on the rolls. We've looked, 800,000 people on the rolls that shouldn't be. Well, come and explain. How did you look? Where did you look? What's the conclusion? I mean, I want to be fair here, and I don't want to leave the Democratic Party unchallenged. That wouldn't be fair, really.
No, and that's the essence of the state law. The state law, as it stands, does restrict that information to political parties, political entities, and they've always had the access.
But okay, but they've always had the access. The whole lawsuit was to put pressure on them and everybody else, because now the Illinois Conservative Union has it.
Now they have
and so
access.
to the extent the establishment wasn't operating, now you've got a disruptive force.
Now there's an outside check.
We know how important disruptive forces are, whether it's in technology, in the academic world, in the private sector, wherever. Disruption done right, done with freedom, and the market in most cases will determine, because this has happened around the country by Judicial Watch, right?
Oh yeah,
Joining with other folks as they have joined with you.
they've always found
multiple
local
states,
plaintiffs,
Pennsylvania, Washington, on and on.
Yep, Virginia, Kentucky,
And yet
Los Angeles.
somebody compiled this and say, to what end are things getting better? David Shestokas, you know this stuff. Are things getting better?
I don't think so,
Why not?
because we still don't, because they're still being run by government, and in many places they're being run by many election jurisdictions are being run by single party government. If they shouldn't be on the rolls, the opportunity for fraud comes about by the fact that, of course, their voting history is public, right? The fact that they haven't voted in X period of time, then people who are not necessarily our best interests at heart go and get ballots for the people that haven't voted, that don't belong
and
on
they
the rolls.
pretend to be those people, perhaps, if they're dead, if they've moved away,
Yeah.
if they're not interested.
Actually,
and then those people vote for them, in a sense, right?
Yes.
But they're not supposed to do that.
Well, it's illegal. It's a crime.
And like every member of the Illinois State Board of Elections, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, here's the challenge to you. They should be begging to come on the show and either say, hey, David's really onto something here and we're going to do something, work with these groups. And every member of the Attorney General's office of the state of Illinois under Kwame Rule should say the same thing, right? Just begging to say, let us inspire these citizens to do what he said. And so, I hope my phone will be ringing soon. Will it?
I hope so too. I'm not optimistic, but I hope so.
Well, David Shestokas, it's been great talking to you. You come back to public affairs, so you come back next week and every week to public affairs.